Oh yeah. Hey yo, it's the Russo Show. Hey yo, it's the Russo Show.
Hey everyone, I'm Joe Russo.
I'm Anthony Russo, and we are back with our second season of Pizza Film School.
Well, let's go back and talk about our first movie, Pieces, which we started filming in 1994. Cinematography, I remember at the time, it was the thing we knew the least amount about, right? Because we weren't photographers.
Yeah, we didn't grow up with cameras.
We're coming at this from like a theatrical background, an acting background. So we had to seek out, I think, really the only working cinematographer in Cleveland at the time, Dave Litz.
David Litz.
Who also was wonderfully artistic, and started working out a color palette with him. What types of lenses did we want to use? And we had to be very specific because these things lenses were expensive. What could we afford? How many did we want? Were we looking for wider, more abstract angles? Were we looking for more intense, shallow depth of field, longer lenses? And do we want a combination? So we had to be very specific.
The whole process of settling on Super 16 film,
right,
et cetera.
Because of the framing, what aspect ratio did we want? So we went through all of those questions very meticulously. We had a notebook. I remember writing these things down. Crew, right? Again, making a movie like this, who's available to you? Who's around you that can help? Who can grip? We were setting up lights. Then I was playing one of the characters. I run in another room, put on some makeup, and jump in the scene and act in the scene. And then we'd have to tear the lights down, and or when I wasn't on camera, I'd be pushing the dolly, or so.
I'm sorry about that. I thought it was mine.
We had a very specific crew. Jake Ost, who was my best friend in college and still works with us at AGBO and is our president of physical production, produced that movie. He was 19 years old, and produced that film. He kept all the equipment in a U-Haul truck outside his house, and he would bring the truck to and from every day. So everybody was chipping in, and it was probably about a core group of about 10 of us that pulled off that film. Rob Zolan flew in from New York, a buddy of mine from the UK, and did some design work for us. The style of the film, right? Well, we were inspired by the French New Wave. But it was as Anthony and I said, we have a million influences. It's hard to identify, what is the singular most important influence to us. I would argue it's somewhere between the French New Wave and anime. It's very hard for us to take anything seriously. And there's always an undercurrent. Remember we did an interview a year ago. I think we were talking about Cherry, and somebody said, there's always fuckery in everything you guys do. And I said, yeah, there is. It's just this undercurrent of fuckery.
One thing about robbing banks is you're mostly robbing women, so the last thing you want to be is rude. Ma'am, it's nothing personal.
But it's one of those things where I went, oh my God, that is really a defining phrase about how we work. Everything is self-reflective. Everything is taking the piss out of the genre while trying to celebrate it at the same time.
Well, that's the thing. I think it has, the dual layer of sincerity and insincerity, and the sort of toggling between the two. Because at the end of the day, we always say this too, while we did like to play in independent cinema and sort of came at things from outsiders, we were also loved the films everybody else loved at the same time. We love the idea that you can connect to other people through movies and that you can connect to almost everybody you knew through movies. That's a very powerful experience, and I think one that we also chase. So I do feel like there's all these kind of paradoxes in terms of what we like about cinema and how we sort of process it.
There was, to be honest, I think there was a bit of a mean-spiritedness to some of the stuff that we did earlier in our careers. We were a little angrier. Pieces is a movie that, I think Soderbergh could appreciate on an intellectual level as this experimental film, but I think it pissed off a lot of people.
There's a lot edgy and dark.
Yeah, there's a lot of edgier content in it. It's very dark, and I would say if you look at sort of the difference between Arrested Development and Community, right? Arrested Development is exceedingly cynical. It's one of the most cynical shows ever in the history of television.
Everything I do is so dramatic and flamboyant. It just makes me want to set myself on fire.
Where Community, there was a little bit more of a heart to it. I think that, those episodes had the ability to lean into emotional resolutions in a way that we couldn't on Arrested Development.
Jeff,
Winger, you son of a bitch. I thought you were dead, man. I was just taking a nap.
So I think there's a growth arc. Certainly over our careers, we've become less chip on our shoulder. A couple of punks from Cleveland. That attitude is shifted into more of a Zen balance. I bring this up because Pieces was a movie that I think that it was polarizing.
That's where we started, and it was a navel-gazing, solipsistic place for sure. Right. And I think, but that's what excited us. That was the motivation. We first had to sort of look inward before we can look outward in our filmmaking process. So,
I understand why it was sent.
Well,
what?
Well, why?
Well, Salvatore Schuba.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I said it because...
Because of what you did.
Completely because of the
Because
fact...
you did what you did.
Yes, you see, because I shot...
Because you shot them.
I shot his brothers.
Killed them.
Killed one.
And maimed the other.
Well, I wouldn't call it maiming.
You shot him in the neck.
All right.
When you're making your first movie and you care about what you're doing, because you have to care about what you're doing because otherwise you'd never be able to make a movie. You have to be very motivated to make a film. It's hard to make a movie. So everything is an opportunity. We approached the entire process when we were making Pieces like everything was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Every decision we were making was, we had one shot to get it right. So we wanted to really think about it from every different angle, make sure we were doing right, put our ideas down, test our ideas, and then commit to them and execute them. And again, I think that's something that Joe and I have developed throughout our collaboration and our careers, is that we are very good at throwing ideas between ourselves and testing them, kicking them, twisting them, trying to beat them. And that's really our creative process in terms of figuring out where we go and what we want to do. So yeah, we were very thorough with Pieces in terms of understanding what we were doing. Also, it was the first time we were doing it, so it's hard to wing something when you don't know it very well.
It's been a hallmark of ours, I think, is that we love to prepare. We have to prepare because this is a partnership, right? But we have to over-communicate with each other, and we have to come to an agreement on the vision and the approach to how we're going to work, which forces us to go through intense preparation. But we're very fast to throw that out if there is something inspirational that happens on the day, if an actor brings something you weren't expecting, if the location brings something that you weren't expecting. We're happy to let the organic part of the process influence us. So we do shot list. We did shot list at the time. We don't so much anymore.
We can't draw, so we didn't
rely on storyboards.
Yeah,
we didn't have storyboards, and we didn't know anyone who could draw. But we would write up notes, director notes, and keep a little book about the way we wanted to execute certain scenes. We would, scouting is critically important. Going to the location before you shoot it with your creative team. Because remember, everything in filmmaking is about when you turn on the camera, because that's when you start spending the most money and the most amount of resources, right? So when you get to set and you turn on that camera, and something like Marvel, we're talking $300,000–400,000 a day, right? If we aren't prepared, that is a lot of money that is going out the window very quickly. But even, to correlate it to your own life, if you're spending $1,000 of your own money, right? Be prepared when you get there. Get to that location before you start spending the money. Talk through, dream up, walk through, figure out, rehearse as much as you can, so that on the day when you have the lights and the equipment and you're rolling, you're doing your best work. And you can be inspired by what happens in the moment because you're so prepared that you have a plan you can fall back on, or you can throw that plan away if you come up with a better plan.
I think another thing that is kind of elemental to our process is that because we are communicating to one another all the time, because we have to vocalize our ideas to one another, it makes it a lot easier for us to vocalize them to other people. And because we have this family mentality, we treat everybody we're making the movie with like fellow filmmakers. So we have exhaustive conversations with our collaborators before we ever get to set. That's also a part of the process, is talking to everybody who is elemental to what you're doing exhaustively about what you're all trying to achieve. And I think that is, I remember doing that on Pieces very much so, talking with all of our partners on that film about what we were looking for as part of our preparation process, so that when we got to the point of execution, everybody was on the same page, everybody was working in the same space.
We don't like long conversations on set. They kill energy, they put the actor in their head. It takes them out of the scene. Then you have to spend the time getting back into the scene. We like those conversations to happen in rehearsals, doing table reads. That's why table reads are really important to us. The more table reads you can do of your script with the key crew and the key cast, the better you will, the better your product will be, the better your story will be, your project will be.
You got a warrant.
You'll have to excuse my partner, John. He's a little young and anxious.
Man among men, huh?
Judy.
Your mother's name?
Here's our warrant, John. I'm afraid we'll have to search the place.
Turn the joint upside down. I'll be in my office.
Pieces was also unique in that I was acting in it, so I wasn't sitting with you at the monitor or looking at. I don't even think we had a monitor. Weren't we just staring at the onboard?
Yeah, exactly.
On the and relying on performance in the room. It's tricky being an actor while you're directing, because I would find myself doing that a lot, where I was trying to be present in the scene, but also trying to evaluate how the scene was unfolding, not only for myself, but for the other actors.
My memory's trying to work backwards here. And the more you put between now and what it is I forget, the least chance I have of remembering what it is I'm trying to remember the things that I forget.
Hey, pal, I said in a minute.
Your job as a director is to get the best performance out of an actor. And there are many different kinds of actors. And on our first movie, we were dealing with an interesting spectrum of actors, in the sense that we had some actors like Joe and several of our other actors who had studied acting very thoroughly and understood it from that point of view. And we were dealing with some non-actors who approach performance in an entirely different way.
And we tend to gravitate, I think, towards actors who are technique-oriented, so that when they come to set, they've done their work prior to getting to set. This again.
That's certainly the easiest type of actor to direct.
The time spent on set is valuable, right? So if you're spending time coaching someone into a character or coaching up a performance, that's time you're not spending telling the story, and it's time that's being taken away from other actors. It's being taken away from the lighting time on set, the look of the project. You want to talk about blocking a little bit?
Yeah, blocking. I mean, we think about shot composition a lot.
Everybody get off him. Give him some air. It's just a nip.
It's something that you do as a director before you get to set, where you sort of envision the scene in your head. And there's certain ideas that you have going into a scene, but when you get on set and you start to look through a camera and you start to move the camera around a room, and then you have actors there now, and they're necessarily bringing something to the performance that you couldn't have imagined. There's a delicate balance that you have to find between knowing exactly how you want to stage something, but also knowing that you need to remain flexible and look for opportunities in terms of what the environment is offering you or what the actors are offering you. So it's a delicate balance when you're directing, between giving a plan and then figuring out how everybody contributes to that plan in a way that may completely change the plan.
We don't use what's called a mark. We don't lay marks down on the ground. It's critical with the DPs that we work with, that they understand that they have to light that in a way that allows the actors to change from take to take. They don't have to go anywhere specific. They will generally sit here and move over there, dependent, because we also like discovery. We don't want to be committed. We'll block a scene, right? Typically you rehearse a scene, then the actors go away, we light it, they get prepped, you come back and you start the scene. You're gonna exclude yourself from making discoveries if everything is prescribed. So we try to keep as few prescriptions on the moment of execution as possible. Camera operation, something that is very important to us, because as I said earlier, the craft of filmmaking is subjective. So what is the point of view of the filmmaker? What is the point of view you want to convey to the audience about a given scene or a given moment? Why are you placing the camera where you're placing it? There's some simple rules about, a camera work. When you're lower, shooting up on a character tends to give them power. If you're shooting down on an actor, it tends to diminish them. It's more of a God's eye point of view.
With editing, let me just describe, Joe and I always cite this filmmaking adage that we love. You make a movie 3 times over: when you write it, when you shoot it, and when you edit it. Each stage of the process is a brand new film.
And there's a potential to completely reinvent the film at each stage of the process.
Yeah, and there's actually a need to, because each day of the process is a totally different form. Things written on a page are one thing. Things that are staged for a camera are another thing. And then as you montage images together, that's a third thing. So in terms of montaging images together, let me just briefly describe how we edited pieces. So when we finished shooting pieces, we were out of money. We ran out of money. It took us more money to get it in the can than we initially thought. So all we could do at the end of shooting, those 39 days of nights, was take the film that we had shot and we stuck it in a refrigerator in a garage and just kept it there for 6 months. It sat for 6 months.
Now, if the power had gone out, the whole movie would have been lost because we didn't develop any of this. This was just the negative sitting in a garage in the fridge.
Yeah, we went back to other things, worked, got a little more money together, and then we borrowed a van from our cousin, and we drove to New York City, and we picked up a Steenbeck, which is a flatbed editing machine where you actually edit film.
It weighs several hundred pounds.
Really heavy machine. And by the way, we were able to get it extremely cheaply because this was the moment where everything was becoming digital. So the Avid was the new editing tool, and most people were using that now. So we could go ahead and find old school film editing equipment for basically like throwaway prices. So we got this Steenbeck, we drove it back to Cleveland. Joe was living in Little Italy in an apartment in Cleveland. Somehow we got it up to the second floor to an empty bedroom where he was living with his wife. And that was our editing room for the next year.
I remember every day I woke up, I could smell the film. Nice thing about a Steenbeck is it's tactile, right? Like you're using a splicer, which is like a mini guillotine to cut the film. You can feel the film. You feel what a foot of, 1 foot of film feels like, and you understand temporally how long that takes. And you had to be very thoughtful about the edits you made because it's a lot of work to edit something and then put one frame back on using tape, and so it was, you had to be very thoughtful in terms of your edits. You could study it over and over before you made the edit. Now, with an Avid, you hit a button, you redo it, you hit another button, you redo it. You can cut very quickly. I mean, temporally, that's one thing that we noticed over the years, moving from the Steenbeck is when we started to get on the Avids, is that the pace of things that we were doing sped up, right? Because we weren't so committed to, we made that edit, I don't know that I want to redo that
go back
edit,
and redo it. But it was an amazing year because we literally just sat with that film and worked with it over and over and over again, and cut the movie and recut the movie and recut the movie and recut the movie. That was a huge learning curve.
It was our film school.
Yeah, that was really understanding how images relate to one another, how they move, what kind of effects you can create, and sort of going through a very experimental phase for a year in a room with a bunch of film.
I mean, if you think about it, we made pieces over 3 years, 3.5 years. It was our film school. We put ourselves through school, teaching ourselves every facet, trying to do every job along the way, writing, directing, acting, editing. We learned every part of the process on a very intimate level, and I think that served us really well over our careers, is understanding what it is that everyone on set does and the ways that they can help service the story. Sound is critical to us. Music is very important. A lot of times we'll find music, even if it doesn't end up in the movie that we'll play on set, that can evoke a tone, it's a great way to communicate with an actor. Here's what we're going for. Feel the energy of this piece of music.
And that's a thing we did on pieces very intensely, is we edited very specifically to music.
That's why we never released it.
We knew nothing about the process at that point, the business side of the equation. So we ended up using a bunch of music that was basically insanely expensive to license or completely unlicensable.
There's Zeppelin, there's Funkadelic, and you go down the list.
So there we had a movie that was basically unreleasable because of how we cut it to music. But we weren't willing at that point. We had spent so long making pieces that we didn't want to go back and recut the film yet again once we realized this error we had made with the music, the expense.
Our process didn't change much from Pieces to Winter Soldier.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
We still prep the same way. We still block the same way. We still cast the same way. We're still looking for the same things. We still have the same conversations about cinematography and costumes and style.
We're still looking to subvert audience expectations, but I think we were doing it in a more subtle and sort of sure-handed and mature way. And I think one reason why we work so well with Kevin Feige on those Marvel movies is because he has a similar process to us in the sense that, like, the way Joe and I figure out what's going to surprise other people is we figure out how to surprise ourselves first and foremost. And I think that was part of the fun of working with Kevin, is like, we knew when we surprised him with an idea that we were in a good zone.
The other thing we always say, this is an important maxim: you can only make the movie out of what you bring into the edit room. That's it, right? Unless you got limitless resources and you can go back and reshoot things. But get as much, roll that camera as much as you can. Try things that you're not expecting.
Ow!
You may think that the character needs to be angry through these 4 scenes. And then you get an editorial and you find that the character is very one-noted and all they are is angry, right? So play with it on the day. Tell the actor, I know the character is upset here, but people don't always express being upset in the same way. Can you internalize it? Can you do it with a smile because you're trying to hide how angry you are? And shape the performance, experiment, so that when you get an editorial, you can go, okay, they're too angry. Remember when we did that take where we lightened them up? Let's subtly weave in some shots from that take to lighten up the character and create a more nuanced and well-rounded performance.
You keep pushing yourself, you're gonna wind up just like him. I'll be feeding you breakfast to a straw and putting you in diapers every morning.
So we're winding down here. We've got a little segment we're going to introduce this year to the podcast called Small Bites, where we're gonna ask sort of questions and get quick, succinct answers to them. Although I don't know if we've ever given a quick, succinct answer in our life.
Okay, if you could work with anyone dead or alive, who would that be?
Paul Newman.
Okay.
If you could direct any other genre that you have yet to, which would you choose?
Horror. If you could give one piece of advice to yourself in your early career, what would that be?
Well, I'm going to steal this advice from Steven Spielberg. We didn't get it directly, but I remember someone told us that a young filmmaker said to Spielberg, I got my first big break, what should I do? Give me one piece of advice to prepare for it. And Spielberg said, start working out, because you need to make sure you are physically prepared for the arduous hours and the time spent and all the stress that you're going to go through, that your body is physically prepared for that, and he wasn't wrong. Nope. What do you want for the rest of your directing career? How would you like to be remembered?
Pass.
Would you rather live without pizza or never direct again?
I would live
Pass.
without pizza.
Okay, wait. If you could watch any piece of content for the first time again, what would it be? That's a good question. I would say the shootout at the end of Once Upon a Time in the West. I think there's like 2 or 3 movies I can think of that make me cry. And that, I don't know what it was, like that, the emotional response I had at the end of that movie, after sitting through like 2.5 hours of this opera. And it all builds to this very simple confrontation between these 2 characters who represent, different aspects of life. I remember it just was a profound experience. Yeah, so to wrap up here, I'll just tell one story. I think I remember when we were at the Cinematography, in Cleveland, and I don't remember what we saw. I think it was like a Swedish film. It was one of those love-hate moments, right? Where it was so precocious at times that you were like disgusted at how navel-gazy it was. And this is from 2 guys who made, one of the more intensely navel-gazy art films that you could possibly make for our first movie. And I remember walking out of the theater back out into the streets in Cleveland, and the Cinematography is in, an urban area in Cleveland, and this was, still at the time post like bankruptcy, and this was a tough city. I remember thinking like, oh, I was just in this room, like escaping for 2 hours, and now I'm back to reality, and I'm back to my life, and I'm back to like my unknown future and everything else. And I remember thinking, and I had this sort of distaste where I was like, they're just fucking movies, and I thought, that might have been like one of the more critical moments for me as a filmmaker, and something that I think helped define our style for the rest of our careers was this idea of attacking artifice while trying to find something true in it. And I think that like that, if there's anything that would define us over our careers, it's that, is this sort of car crash between artifice and truth. And it's intrinsic to who we are, and it's intrinsic to how we grew up as brothers in Cleveland, and it's intrinsic to the way that we look at the world. And it really hasn't changed over time. I still think maybe we've softened, maybe we've become a little bit more zen, maybe we've become more balanced in our approach. But ultimately, that if you retrospectively look at our work, it always in some way goes back to that idea of artifice versus truth.
And I'll tell one more story as a closer that's a corollary to that, which is, a lot of people, a lot of filmmakers, a lot of artists like to approach what they do as if they're magicians, and they don't want the audience to know their tricks. We've always had a process where we wanted to make our process very open to people.
We're the Penn and Teller of filmmakers.
We're trying to demystify the filmmaking process and make it feel less precious rather than more precious, because we sort of like that democratic approach to it, and I think it also speaks to the fact that we feel like we came from a million miles away from the film business, yet somehow found our way here, and we'd like to open that pathway up to anybody who wants to follow. So with our company, AGBO, AGBO, when we were doing our first work together, our first creative work together, we were putting on a sketch comedy troupe at Case Western Reserve University. And it was called No Shame Comedy, and we were about to put on our very first show, and we were trying to get attention drawn to the show because nobody knew us at that point. So we thought, well, let's write an article for the student newspaper, and we'll write it as a critic who has already seen the show that we've not put on yet. And this critic will despise the show. But in his hatred for what he's seen in our comedy show, we'll sort of code everything we love about what we're doing and while it's valuable. So after we wrote the article, which was great fun, we thought, well, now we have to ascribe a pseudonym to the author, to this critic. So we opened up the Cleveland phone book, and we didn't get very far into the phone book before we came across this name, Gozi AGBO. And it just stuck. That's who wrote the article. And years later, when we finally had the ability to set up our own production company, we spent many, many months trying to come up with a name. And everybody involved in the process of setting up the company was trying to help us think of names. And Joe and I went through hundreds, it must have felt like hundreds of names. Yeah. And finally, at the end of the process—
Remember, it was Plasma Light Show.
Exactly.
Crazy shit.
It
was
at the end of the process.
a SNL skit with naming companies giving us presentations of,
right.
Yeah.
Everything. And we just said, well, what's something that entertains us and that is meaningful to us? And we remembered Gozi AGBO. And that ended up being the name of our company, and that's—
It's also the pseudonym I use whenever I do a cameo.
Yeah, Joe carried Gozi AGBO forward as a pseudonym for his acting, and I like it as the name of our film company because to me it feels like an eye chart at the doctor. Yeah. You just cover one eye.
I think this is the most important thing to remember from this podcast and from this season. If you're in Nigeria or China or India or Brazil or Germany or Canada, wherever you are in the world, that you have the ability and the access to tell stories on the most simple level, and you have the internet, the gift of the internet, to communicate with other people through telling those stories. It's possible, and you can find yourself a path that allows you to do something you love, if that's truly what you love. So it is attainable, it is possible. Keep dreaming and go out and tell some incredible stories. Mangia bene. Thank you for listening to Pizza Film School.
Ciao.
Say goodbye to whoever you say goodbye to.
Hey, ciao, Bella.